Welcome to another lesson in Adobe Photoshop. Today we're going to talk briefly about the Layers window or Layers panel. This is a very important window in Adobe Photoshop. It allows you to do a lot of different effects and things, but it's a very complicated window to get to know. So I just want to start out. There's 3 layers for this project already, and these are the 3 layers here. The active layer is always highlighted. Okay, so whatever layer you want to work on, that's going to be the one that becomes highlighted. Just know that if you have a selection on the screen, that whatever you are doing will only work inside that selected area. So if I'm painting right now, I am on this layer, I'm painting inside that selected area. Even if you are on a, let's say we click on a different layer and you begin to paint, all right, and you're wondering why it's not painting, I have this layer active, okay, even though I'm seeing this layer. So what happened was, when I was painting just then, is painting onto the other layer. So it's really important to keep track of what layers you're on and to keep track of your selection. So a selection will kind of override the layer as far as the area it's working in. If nothing is selected, and I'm going to hit Command or Control D on my keyboard to deselect that area right now, now it'll work on the entire layer. So whatever I do right now, it's doing it to the entire layer, not just in that selected area. It's just working on the layer that is highlighted. So make sure that when you are in your layers window, you're working on the right layer. If I want to paint on this layer, I gotta make sure this layer is selected. Okay, let's undo that. To turn the visibility on and off for each layer, there's a little eyeball in front of it. Also know that if you turn the visibility off, it won't let you draw on that layer. Okay, but it's just still very important to understand like what's going on here. Want to let me work, why won't it let me work? Because I'm on a layer that has been turned off, the visibility has been turned off. Okay, so if I want to work on layer 1, I have to click on layer 1. Layers can interact with each other. So if I want to, let's say I want this gradient to be on top of the picture and be able to see through it, you can do that in the layers window. So to move layers, you can click and drag, and then you can kind of shuffle these like a deck of cards, like if I want to move this layer down. Now know that if the layer says background, that background layer is going to be stuck back there. So what you have to do to background layers, and I always do this whenever I have, when I start a project or something, I will double click on the layer to make it layer 0, and then just click OK. So now this is converted to a layer that you can actually shuffle around. Okay, so I'm going to move this gradient to the top here, and I want to be able to see through to the gradient underneath, and there's a couple ways you could do that. So you see the word opacity here. If I bring the opacity down, it'll allow you to begin to see through the layer. Okay, so now it looks a little like foggy with the gradient on top of there. You can also do that with the layer blend modes. And these modes are something you're going to want to get used to in Photoshop. If you select something like multiply, it's taking the pixels here and kind of like adding them to the pixels underneath, and it always creates like a darker area. Multiply is good for making shadows and things like that. But each one of these does a different thing, and sometimes it's a little hard to predict exactly what's going to happen for each one. But as you work in Photoshop, you kind of get used to what they do, and you could take a guess as to how it's going to work. But what's nice is that as you scroll through these, it kind of shows you what's going to happen as you get to each one. And it's just different ways that the layer is interacting with the layer underneath. So these are your layer blend modes. I'm going to leave this on. Let's just go with color burn because it's kind of a drastic thing there. The fill button doesn't really control the opacity as much as whether it is like completely filled in or not. Okay, and there's other options for fill. And there's other parts of the layer window, like layer options. When you double click on a layer or you go to the FX button at the bottom, you get the layer style or layer effects window. This is going to be a whole other tutorial, so I'm going to cancel out of that. At the bottom of the window, you find things like that FX window, which is where you get to your drop shadows and strokes and beveled edges and things like that. You also find a layer mask button. The layer mask opens up a different part of the layer that is linked to the original layer, where you can do things like control whether you see through I'll do this to the picture, probably work a little bit better. So I'm going to click on the picture, and this is the mask mode. I click and drag with a gradient that goes from black to white, and now what it's doing is it's blocking out. Where the gradient was black, it's blocking out. Where it's white, you can see it. You can also do this with a brush on the mask layer. If I paint with black, you're blocking out part of the picture. What's nice about this is it's not permanent. So now if I change this to white, it can come back. So masking is probably a whole other lesson in itself, but that button is down there. And there's also all these layer adjustments that are there. So if you want to throw a gradient on top of this, you can go to the adjustments button, and you can click adjustments, and you can find a gradient, and you could put that on top of there, and then now you have, just like we had before, another layer that can interact with what's underneath there. If you want to group your layers together, you can put layers in folders, because you might end up with projects with tens and hundreds of layers, so you might need to group them together in folders. To create a new layer, there's a new layer button here, or Shift Command N will create a new layer. You can also duplicate a layer. Let's say you wanted a copy of this picture layer here. If you hit Command J, or if you go to the flyout menu, there's all these layer options here too for new layer, duplicate layer, and things like that. You can create a copy of a layer. So, and to trash a layer, you just can click on the trash button, whatever layer selected, or you can drag it to the little trash icon at the bottom of the screen. So that was a good introduction to your layers window. There's a lot more to it, so we'll probably get to those in some other little video tutorials.